In this lesson, we'll continue to use the file from the previous exercises as we begin to look at applying sketch constraints. We'll select Sketch 1 in the browser, right-click, and edit the sketch. Note that the Show Constraints is turned on in the Sketch palette. The small icons next to the sketch entities will tell us what constraints are applied. Turning the Show Constraints option off will make the icons disappear, but we'll be able to tell that our sketch is still fully defined based on the coloration of the sketch entities. As we move over the sketch, areas that can be turned into 3D geometry will highlight. Let's turn the Show Constraints back on. To begin exploring some of the constraint options, we'll begin by deleting a few of the auto-applied constraints. It's possible that you might have to do this beyond these exercises because sometimes auto-applied constraints might not be applied exactly the way you want the sketch to be constrained. Now remember, this horizontal line was drawn from this point to this reference line that was created with the center point rectangle, which fully defines the line's length based on the vertical distance that was dimensioned, as well as the fact that the 3-inch dimension is fully defined. What we will do first is left-click on the tangent constraint and hit the delete key. Then we'll click on this parallel constraint and delete it. Finally, we'll left-click on this parallel constraint and delete it as well. The reason for doing this is to show the way the sketch is defined. The top line has a horizontal vertical constraint, which keeps it completely horizontal. With the constraints removed, you can see that I'm free to drag the sketch, and you can see how things will move without control. I'll use Ctrl-Z to undo the change. To begin rebuilding the constraints, I'll select a horizontal line, go to the sketch palette, and start the horizontal vertical constraint. Remember, this was previously parallel to the top. Pre-selecting the entity or entities, then selecting the constraint you want is one method for applying constraints. You can also pre-select the constraint, then select the geometry. For example, applying a horizontal vertical constraint to this line on the right. When I select the line, I will get a notice that says it will fail to solve and to please try revising dimensions or constraints. The conflict is because there is still a perpendicular constraint in the upper right corner. However, it can be applied to the left side because there's no perpendicular constraint in that corner. I'll press Escape on the keyboard to stop the constraint tool. Now I will delete the perpendicular constraint in the upper right. When I selected it, I accidentally deleted my construction line, so we need to use Undo. To avoid this type of mistake, you might need to zoom in. If I choose to, I can delete it again, and then go ahead and delete the constraint while the line is gone, and then press L on the keyboard to start the line tool, and draw a new line starting at the lower left corner, going to the upper right corner, and then of course press Escape to finish the line tool. When I select the line, you'll notice that we now have a contextual option in the sketch palette that allows us to change this line to a construction line. Adding this does not mean that the sketch is fully defined, but if we left-click on this line, then hold Ctrl, and click on the other construction line, we can place an equal constraint so that the construction lines are held equal in length. So if I drag the rectangle, you'll see how it moves. I will undo my move and start the midpoint constraint from the sketch palette. I'll select the origin point of the sketch and one of the construction lines so that its midpoint is bound to the origin of the sketch. Now I can no longer drag it left or right, but move it up and down to resize my box, but it remains centered. I'll undo the size change, start the equal constraint again, and select the top line and one of the sides. Because of the 3-inch dimension from left to right, making these two equal will allow us to make sure that the rectangle becomes a square. In some cases, it's helpful to minimize the number of dimensions to control your design by using geometric constraints instead of fully defining the sketch using dimensions. There is still one last sketch entity that is still blue, and that's the radius value because we removed the original tangency constraint. We'll simply reapply tangency between the arc and the vertical line, and the sketch will be fully defined again. Now we can save the file and be ready for the next step.